Hello, and welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and I'm a congenital amputee of the right hand. In this show, I will interview other amputees and allow them to tell you their incredible life stories. I'll also feature family members of amputees and others who support the amputee community, all in an effort to discuss the challenges and triumphs of those living with limb loss. So stick around and listen to inspirational stories and find out why we say, We're Not Stumped. Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the We're Not Stumped podcast. I'm your host, Mike Boland, and today we've got Joe Fairley on. Joe is the owner of Ascent Fabrication, and he is doing a lot with 3D printing and for prosthetics. So, Joe, thank you so much for being on the We're Not Stumped podcast.
Very happy to be here, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. So we always start the We're Not Stumped podcast with in your own words. So I'd love to hear the Joe Fairley story.
Yeah, absolutely. So first and foremost, I'm the owner and founder of Ascent Fabrication, which is generally a 3D printing company, but very specialized in the prosthetics and orthotics industry. I'm a certified prosthetist and board eligible in orthotics as well. And I started to get into the prosthetics and orthotics industry back in 2015, 2016, when I started to see the rise of a global volunteer community called Enable. And Enable was focused around 3D printing, kind of hero-themed prosthetic hands for kids. Mm-hmm. And these 3D printed prosthetic hero hands that were superhero themed, and you saw these really cool news articles out there on them. I really thought that was pretty interesting and wanted to more about it. I originally saw the first amputee that I ever came across when I was in high school, actually. So I was a cross country and track runner in high school and in college, and a little bit here past college. And in my sophomore year of high school, we got to go out to the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista, California. Wow. Our high school team was nationally recognized. We had a pretty solid team, so we had these great opportunities. And while I was running around the track one day, finishing up a workout, I started to hear this pitter patter come behind me. And I looked over my left shoulder, didn't see anything. And before I could look over my right shoulder, he's already sprinting by me on bilateral, below the knee running blades. And, it's just so cool to see a Paralympian, in his element like that. And, someone on, prosthetic devices. I thought that was the coolest thing and wanted to work with people like that.
That's an interesting story. I know that in the Olympics, the regular Olympics a few years ago, Pistorius, if I'm saying it correctly, Oscar, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, right. He made it to the Olympics. And I have some different thoughts on using prosthetics in the regular Olympics. Do you have any thoughts on that? I'd be happy to share mine, but
yeah, it's interesting because, some people think there's like some kind of advantage over, some other people that way. And because the carbon fiber blades are engineered to kind of act like springs, they store energy as they're compressed and release energy as they expand. So, I can see where there's a lot of different ideas flying around there, but I think if anyone's able to compete at that level, no matter what external hardware they're using, obviously using some kind of internal, booster is definitely off the case. But if an amputee can get to that level of, athletic ability, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think about my own case, and I think, well, what if I got in the octagon and put my hook on? I think I would have just so much of an advantage, an unfair advantage. And that's why I think there's nothing wrong with the Paralympics for those types of things. I think there's no problem, in my opinion, of having a separate Olympics for people that have prosthetics. Because again, if I got in a boxing ring or an octagon and go, hey, I want to wear my prosthetic, I could probably kill somebody. So I have a little different opinion. It's just my opinion. Doesn't mean it's right or it's wrong. But this is coming from somebody that I was on the Pro Bowlers Tour. So, all the way up to is the highest you can go in my sport. But that's just the way I feel. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong.
Yeah, no, very cool. I think you'd have to have a little bit more specialized of a prosthesis for boxing for that too anyways. So
yeah. Yes. I'm going to hit you
around a metal hook. Yeah, I don't think that'd be exactly useful for that.
I'm going to have to hit you up on that because what you do is amazing. And you have one of the devices I see in the background there. 3D printing, that has changed the industry, hasn't it?
It has already, and I say already because a lot of people talk about 3D printing as it's the future, but in my eyes, it's already the past. We've been printing now for over 8 years in prosthetics and orthotics. So I'm trying to help this adoption within the field, and most of that is just around people understanding what can we print, how do we print it, are these things that we print durable enough to go out for everyday use and for long-term use for people? So I'm helping, different clinicians around the country understand, what's possible for us to print. Is it relatively the same as what they're providing right now? Because we can go down the rabbit hole of insurance reimbursement, but they want to know dollars and cents. Is it comparable to what they're already providing for patients as well? So yeah, we're basically a central fabrication entity for the prosthetics and orthotics field. So we get 3D scan data from clinicians all over the country, in Canada, and a couple other countries as well, where we're able to remotely take that clinician's preference of what device they would like to build around that 3D scan. We do for what's actually going to be done with that device. And then we'll set it up to print either on a few of our printers that we have here. Otherwise, actually, we'll send in some cases, that design back to the clinician so they can print it in their own clinic. So that's kind of the other half of what we do at Ascent Fab is I will actually go out and train the prosthetist, orthotist how to use 3D printers effectively in their clinic. We'll be on site for 2 days. We bring materials and the software and some of the hardware in some cases, and go from start to finish, 3D scanning a patient to fitting a patient with a device.
And if people are interested in learning that part, how do they get a hold of you? Is that through the website?
Mostly through word of mouth at this point. Honestly, there's a lot of word of mouth going on in the field that people start to talk about. Well, who do I go to?
Yeah.
For this advice, and my name's floating around there quite a bit amongst maybe 3 or 4 others that have about the same amount of knowledge clinically and on the 3D printing side as I do. But on our website's kind of evolving right now. We kind of started in the prosthetics and orthotics field, but we're quickly also getting outside the field with a lot of different 3D printing projects we're doing. So there's a lot of information on there about those devices that we provide. And then I talk a little bit about it in my podcast as well, the Fabrication Friday podcast every Friday.
Yeah, that's every Friday, and I listened to a couple of the episodes already. Talk about that podcast, because that's a great podcast.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. It's I love podcasts, in general. So I listen to a lot of podcasts before I try to decide about, do I want to start one? Why would I start one? I wanted to give people another route of listening to some different information around, again, what is possible in the 3D printing industry. Because I'm so now heavily involved in the 3D printing industry in general. We have a lot of great tidbits on, what printers should you be using? What materials should you be using? No matter what you're actually printing. And then we talk about some very in-depth like tech tips of how to get a good print. We do some best practice, little blurbs in there as well. And then I interview a lot of the more general 3D printing industry folk. I began with a lot of people who are already involved with the prosthetics and orthotics industry, but it's, definitely getting past that too.
And that was your schooling, if I'm not mistaken. And then you found your story about how you started the 3D printing. I think is a fantastic story. We talked about it earlier. Do you mind talking about that again?
Absolutely. So yeah, I was a senior in my undergrad at Siena College here in upstate New York, as a physics major of all things. And my thesis capstone there senior year was to try to come up with my own project for something that I was passionate about. And with the background in astrophysics that we were given, I didn't quite know, what I wanted to do with that. Didn't really feel like I wanted to do anything specifically in astrophysics. So my mentor kind of said, well, hey, there's this machine down in the basement that no one knows how to use. It's called a 3D printer. We've had it for 6 months now and it's just collecting dust. So why don't you go down there and try to understand, how to use it and use it for something useful. So I had never heard of a 3D printer before. This is 2015. Desktop 3D printers were just coming out and being more commercially available. So this was an Ultimaker 3D printer, about the size of maybe cubed about your computer laptop size. So, maybe twice the size of a shoebox. So we're printing fairly small things in it. And like my tinkering mind was back then, if I didn't know how something worked, I took it apart and tried to put it back together again if I saw there was an issue. So because I didn't understand the slicer settings back then, or really understand, extruding plastic in general, I did a lot of YouTube searching, tried to reach out to like anyone on the internet who was doing any 3D printing at that time. And that's when I found Enable, this kind of global group of volunteers that were printing out these hero-themed prosthetic hands for kids. That most of them were congenital. They had had this since birth. And, I thought that was a awesome way to try to blend, my interest for prosthetics that had been lingering with this new technology of 3D printing, which I just found fascinating. So went through a project there where I got very, very heavily involved with Enable, actually started their college chapter aspect of the group. So I managed like 5 or 6 different college chapters around the country, including the one that I was at Siena. Wow. And really, we were just trying to understand best about how do we provide these devices, because with the global do-gooders, as I call them, they're engineers, they're tinkerers, they have a 3D printer, and they see, well, why can't I just provide this to a kid? There wasn't a lot of clinical input at that time, unfortunately. So with my interest on the clinical side of things, I wanted to be able to provide the best device that someone was going to actually use. So we got very heavily involved in finding, the clinic aspect of what is prosthetics and orthotics. So I started shadowing around a few clinics. I found a local clinic that actually was looking for a prosthetic technician. So I became a prosthetic technician for a year and a half, found that there was this master's degree you could go get for prosthetics and orthotics. So I applied to Northwestern University, and at that time, my grades from undergrad weren't very good. So I had to kind of prove myself to get into Northwestern. So fair enough, my mentor from undergrad took me into Merrimack College in Massachusetts and said, there's this brand new master's degree program we're starting. You can come with me and do a fellowship and do more 3D printing and prosthetic stuff. And it was in exercise and sports science. So it was kind of getting me a little bit more oriented toward the medical field in general. And being the running buff that I am, it was kind of right up my alley for what I wanted to do and be interested in. So I went and did that for a year, and then ended up coming full circle. Finally got to Northwestern, went through the just under 2 years or just over 2 years degree there through prosthetics and orthotics. You're on site at Northwestern for just over a year, but they actually have a online portion before you go for about 3 months. Might have been more than that, maybe 5 months. And then afterward, it was about 3 months of more online work. So kind of this really neat, remote and hybrid concept, which allowed me to keep working as a prosthetic technician as I was getting into Northwestern. So then came time for me to graduate 2019, headed down to Savannah, Georgia. Never been in Georgia, but heard of these really cool people from Amputee Blade Runners. Not sure if you've heard of ABR, but Ryan Fan, one of the co-founders, there's going to be a theme here. So Ryan's actually a former Paralympian, and a very active runner himself, with what's called a Boyd amputation, so directly through the ankle joint, a very intricate procedure there. But I looked up Ryan's athletic career and seeing him as a clinician, and just he was the person that I really wanted to learn under. So down there through Amputee Associates, I was working as a resident, and kind of had a different residency case than some people might have, but that residency was actually bought out by another group, Hanger Clinic, while I was there.
Oh, okay.
So I was with Ryan for about 6 months, transitioned to Hanger for the rest of my residency, a little over 8 months, and then came full circle back up to upstate New York here, where I was a prosthetic and orthotic technician for my orthotics residency, and then becoming a certified prosthetist, and then worked in the field with them for about another 1.5 years before I started Ascent Fabrication.
What amazes me about your story is how much you have seen since 2015, especially. I mean, that was in the early stages, I think, as you kind of alluded to, of 3D printing, and then being able to see the whole, the history is kind of laid out in front of you. And as I think about the E-Nable, is that how it's said?
Yeah.
And what they were doing, I have a question about that. And basically, was it a functional prosthetic for the hand, or was it just aesthetics, which is fine either way? I was just curious.
Yeah. So they had a partially functional hand where it worked off of the wrist tenodesis. So just by moving your wrist back
like this.
Forth, the fingers close.
Okay.
So as you went into its extension with your wrist, the fingers opened. Went into flexion with your wrist, the fingers closed.
Okay.
Because there was a forearm portion with some strings going attached to the other fingers. And just with kind of a simple Velcro closure over a partial hand, these kids were able to just be able to bend their wrist and then function the hand. If they were missing a little bit more of their arm, if they were more of a transradial or even transhumeral in some cases, I think they use the actuation of your wrist, elbow flexion instead. So same kind of function, same idea. They were, I would say, a lot more of courage boosters than they were actual functional prosthetic devices. Sure. We delivered 2 of them to 2 different kids, actually, personally, one in Ohio and one in St. Louis, Missouri. One was Superman themed, or
that's great.
Yeah, I think it was Superman or Iron Man, one of the 2.
Yeah.
And the other one was Batman themed. So we got some really cool courage booster aspects out of it, because the kid was around his friends, and they thought it was the coolest thing ever, this bionic aspect. And I think they did a really nice job of doing that side of things, giving the kids a reason to use a prosthesis at that age. But functionality wasn't quite there.
Well, I can speak from personal experience. I don't remember this part of my life. I'm congenital, by the way. I used to wear a mitt. Basically, it was just it looked like an oven mitt as a hand on this side when I was probably before I was 1 year old. And that was really just basically to your point, kind of get used to having something over there. And it was also very soft, so I was able to kind of teethe on it too. If I could find a picture of it, I'll include it in on the podcast.
Yeah, I think I've seen one before too.
Yeah, I think now would be considered vintage because of my age. What are you going to do? It is what it is. But looking at that whole history, when I think about what you've gone through, even the 3D printers, I would imagine themselves have just, who knows how quadrupled in capabilities over that time.
Leaps and bounds. Yeah, leaps and bounds. It's not just the printers, but the materials as well.
Oh, okay.
And just the general knowledge of, so you have this CAD design of this part, right? But then you have to go through what's called a slicing process in order for the FDM printers that I use here. So you're prepping that part to print. So that includes the orientation. Which way are you going to orient the part on the bed? And then the software will physically slice your object into layers. Well, depending on the material, you might have to be faster or slower in some layers, some spots, different temperatures, different cooling. And so I think that's the most of what I've learned about over the last 8 years has been how to slice a part reliably, where I can look at it effectively and know almost right before I print it whether or not it's going to print well or not. I've had probably a couple hundred prints now that have not gone so well, that end up as, this ball of twisted plastic, a rat's nest or a bird's nest or something. And, those are the frustrating moments, but, everyone would be joking if they said they didn't have these type of, failures. Obviously, we learned from our failures and mistakes. I think that's what has progressed so much in the field of 3D printing is, having better hardware, having more knowledge over the software. The softwares are becoming more intuitive to use and a little bit more hand-holding for those people that haven't had that experience yet.
And you were talking about the actual material too.
Yeah.
I've seen some videos where there's like a flexible material that you can create, that you can 3D print, which is amazing to me. Wow. That's gotta be, go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just thinking, when I think about like my socket, my prosthetic, it would seem like that would be such a benefit to be able to have something like that.
Absolutely. So I do have a bunch of stuff to share.
Thank you.
If you'd like to see some things here
for
those on the video. So we do have one of our flexible inner sockets. And some of what is interesting about 3D printing is that, we're able to do things with 3D printing that you can't fabricate traditionally, or it's extremely hard to do that. So this flexible inner socket is basically a polyurethane rubber type material that comes in several different colors. So we do flexible inner sockets with that. We have our protective covers that would be actually a mirror image of their contralateral limb. So we'd take a 3D scan of their existing limb, whether it's upper extremity or lower extremity, and then a scan of their prosthesis. And we have this inner part here that would actually interface with the prosthesis and a posterior slit. So there's a easy on, easy off magnetic closure system that directly integrates within this other inside piece, which can also open up and move over the prosthesis. So, with these different flexible materials, we can do a lot of fun things.
Well, thank you for showing that. And for everyone that's watching the video, like you were saying, I actually took my eyes off the camera and started looking at what you had built. That's amazing. And to think that you incorporated the magnets in it to try to get those together. Like, what kind of experimentation was that? That's brilliant.
Yeah, people think about 3D printing as a prototyping process, which it is. It's a very great prototyping process because the amount of material that this costs is about $6 to $8 worth of material. So you can prototype things relatively quickly within a 24-hour period, and for low cost. So that's kind of what 3D printing has been really set up well for. But yeah, trying to get a design like this that actually opens and closes, and you hear that kind of snap.
Yes.
There were a lot of hours put into trying to see how we could actually print those magnet holders.
Yes.
Because if you see, there's actually a ledge here. So you're printing over air, and you effectively can't print over air because of gravity. So we have to print support material up to that point. So there's some post-processing of us cutting some of this stuff out and getting it to this final part. But like you see here, it's just, it's a lot about the design aspects of like how we're going about solving a problem here. One of our other very intricate devices here, it's a polypropylene outer frame, outer socket, and then an inside, another flexible material that is a little bit different. It's actually a foam material that is a little hard for me to take out right now because we also have this kind of keyed in the back. But what you can't really see on the inside is that over this bony anatomy, there's actually cushion in here. So you can, in between the walls, you can feel this cushion that will give with a person's bony anatomy to reduce that amount of pressure that someone's feeling over that bony anatomy. So that's our kind of flagship, I would say, device. The Foam Flex Air flexible inner socket has just had amazing results for people over the last year and a half.
Well, I think about my old prosthetic over there, and then looking at what I'm seeing here, and just thinking about how comfortable it would have been to put my arm in something like that. And I would even imagine lower extremity, because of the weight bearing, would be even more beneficial. Is that true?
Yeah, that's the feedback we've been getting.
Wow.
So from the few clinicians that we have had working with us with these sockets, maybe upwards of 12 or 15 different clinicians now with just as many or more patients. They're saying that they're seeing less instances of skin abrasions over the bony anatomy, which is awesome to see. You don't want to have that skin friction causing, blisters and ulcers and worse. And then just because of the nature of it being a foam, it's incredibly lightweight. So people are, really enjoying that. It's a little bit lighter weight, that nice soft cushion feature. So it's been working out really well.
That's excellent. I mean, I had never seen anything like that. And that's what I like about the podcast, being able to learn from people like you and see what's really out there now, because it's been a long time since I wore prosthetics, so that is what it is. But it's really neat to see that. So when I talk to you and everything you've seen, what are some of the success stories that like people have? It's changed their lives being able to get in these 3D printed prosthetics and get around better than they ever have.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, we kind of touched on it earlier, just before the podcast, but a lot of this comes from someone actually taking ownership over their device and making it their own. So, at the very least, a prosthetic cover could have some type of imprint design on it. We just did a set of bilateral below the knee covers for a veteran who was awarded a Purple Heart. So I actually etched into this, embossed his Purple Heart into the cover. There was another instance where this Foam Flex Air socket, the patient was able to actually run comfortably on that socket for the first time in, I think he said 20 or 30 years, him being a user for longer than that. So to hear that kind of feedback, that people are able to do things that they weren't able to do, or they're putting their own personal touch into it. I mean, that's why we're in this. We want to make, this technology useful for people, and, just make that kind of care better for people overall.
Yeah, it's such a neat thing to see. And I just can tell you that you're helping quite a bit of people. So what's next for you and your organization as you look forward?
Yeah, so I think, we're definitely getting into a lot more of the 3D printing industry in general. So we had a fun project last week where I wanted to design a floating shelf to go up on the wall. And, it was a pretty simple design that we printed out in 10 hours. And now that's going to end up being a product that we are building an actual marketplace for. It's kind of a sneak preview of what's, but we're getting into printing different everyday products. I printed myself a garbage can the other day because I needed a garbage can. So useful things that people can use in their everyday life. Ascent Fab is moving into, that end of things for the consumer level. We also sell 3D printers and material though. So along with our training programs, we will actually sell some of these 3D printers. We are the North American distributor for a new conveyor belt 3D printer, which is pretty interesting. So really getting into like the production level status of 3D printing, being able to print consistently over and over and over again for a couple days in a row, really is getting into this next level of, how we're using the FDM 3D printing that we are. And there's a lot of different forms of 3D printing too. So we can also help people with some of the more industrial forms of 3D printing, HP multi-jet fusion, and selective laser sintering, SLS, which are more so powder bed fusion ways of 3D printing. So there's a layer of powder that's put down, and then a laser goes over and cures that layer, and then more powder and laser and powder and laser. And so those are creating extremely robust parts that are being utilized in, so many different industries right now. People are getting into metal 3D printing. We're getting into some carbon fiber and fiberglass 3D printing with a prosthetic foot and knee design that we have a patent for this specific type of printing.
Wow.
So, we're really trying to push the boundaries of what can and should be 3D printed. But I'm really too also passionate about just teaching people about, how to use this in the best way possible. So, this training aspect of what we're getting into is really growing. I'm going to be in 4 different states in the next 5 weeks. Going out to Buffalo, going out to Massachusetts, going down to South Carolina, and then I'll be in Indianapolis for the AOPA conference.
Yep.
So, we're getting around, and, again, just trying to help people adopt this technology in the best way possible.
Well, let me know when you're in Arizona. We can meet up.
I almost had a training for a guy in Phoenix, so got to catch up with him, but he was definitely interested. So yeah, if I get out there, I'll certainly let you know.
Yeah, definitely do that, and I'll show you like the archaic prosthetics that I have.
Yeah, no, that's quite all right. So yeah, could you tell me a little bit about your experience with prosthetic devices as well, and kind of how you came into the podcast aspect of things?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate this. And this is the fun part of doing this podcast. As you know, you have your own podcast, so every once in a while, when you're the
now.
Yeah, when you're the guest, things change, and it's like, ooh, okay, now I got to speak, because I have the liberty of being able to ask questions and kind of sit back. And you did such a great job before. But I was born like this. I was born without a right hand, and my parents were always the type of people that wanted me to have the whatever kind of experience that I needed to have to be successful in my life, and certainly with my brother and sister too. It wasn't just about me. So they made sure that they learned as much as they could at the time. They didn't even know they're going to have a one-handed boy, because there was no ultrasounds or anything like that. I don't even think they knew they're having a boy, let's face it. Yeah. So it was quite a surprise, but they did everything they could to learn. I went to an organization back in New Jersey, where I'm from. It's called the Kessler Institute, and I believe they're still there. And I was very fortunate to be in some of their early pamphlets, and showing me using my hook and wearing my hook, because I wore a hook until I was 12 years old, until I was in 8th grade. And towards the end, and this is kind of all a blur now, because it's quite a while ago for me, but I would say between like 6th and 8th grade, when I quit wearing one, I would kind of go a couple days on, couple days off. The reasoning, I really don't know, because I really feel like if I fixed that hook right now, I'd be just as good as I was all those years ago. Once I broke it, though, and I remember my parents going, "Hey," and I'll tell the story that I haven't never shared about how it broke. Yeah, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to do this. How it broke. I used to go up to my friends, and they would hold my hook, with both hands, and I'd be able to always open it, because this is the muscle here is, especially with young people's hands, they weren't quite as strong.
Right.
Well, as people started to get a little older, like I said, about 8th grade, maybe it was 9th, but I'm pretty sure it was 8th grade. Their strength to be able to keep that closed met my strength to be able to open it, and the cable just snapped.
Okay.
So that's how I stopped wearing the hook. So to get back, my parents asked me, "Would you like to get another hook?" And I just kind of go, "No, I'm good. This is the way I'm." Yeah. That was the decision. I wouldn't say that there was a lot of reflection, but I think at that point in my life, I would just happen to be getting along a little bit more without one, whether it be basketball. I love basketball. I think I said I was on the Pro Bowlers tour. I never bowled with a hook on. I never drove with a hook on. And that's not to say at all that I'm against prosthetics. I'm 100% for them. I really am. I think they're so necessary. For me personally, I don't happen to wear one now, but so that's my story. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, no, I'd love to hear it. And, it's interesting that you mentioned, that back then when you were using it, you maybe were using it for some specific reasons, right? It wasn't just you were using it all day, every day. Like, did you only use it when you went to school and then maybe you came home and stopped using it, or kind of what was that like?
Boy, I'd actually like to. Unfortunately, my parents aren't here any longer. They're no longer with us. I'd ask my sister that question because it really didn't. Whatever I was doing at the time was normal to me. So it wasn't something that was burned into my memory where I go, well, this is the reason why I'm doing it. I don't remember. I'm pretty sure I did take it off when I got home, but I'm trying to think of what I used it for back then. I mean, I could write with it. I could do drink with it. I could do eat with it. I was able to do everything pretty much. I was very fortunate before I was 3 years old, I was in the Newark Daily News. They had some article on kids with prosthetics, and there's a picture of me with my hook on because I was able to control it before I was 3 years old.
Okay. Yeah, I know that's really neat. I think there's been a little bit of development on the pediatric side for 3D printing, but not focused on as much, I think, because people are still kind of, figuring out how to use it for adults now as well. But, we are starting to get more into, how could we integrate prostheses at a younger age where it's not only functional, but it's also cosmetic.
Yeah.
And, because in the upper extremity prosthetics side of things, that's definitely the biggest driving factor of someone actually utilizing it for a long period of time. If they're born like that, then typically they won't use a prosthesis for much. But it's these other people who become an amputee, especially upper extremity, that they're looking to replace something that was lost. So we see that difference in the prosthetics field across the board. Your story is very, very similar to what I've heard being a clinician in the field now for a few years. So yeah, I'd like to say that I'm not surprised that you're not using one right now, but I guess there's always the opportunity if it presents itself and something was of interest to you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I've done just personally, I do like to work out. I don't run as much as you, but I do like to work out quite a bit. And I made myself a prosthetic out of PVC so I can do curls. And it basically, I put PVC together with a U-bolt, able to put my dumbbell on there, and I can do curls, like I said, do presses.
There you go.
Quite a bit. One of the things I'll say, though, that as I've gotten older is the wear and tear on my left side is definitely something that I've seen because... And I'll say this, I do quite a bit with my right side. You'd be surprised. I mean, I'll carry everything. Like when I get groceries, I'll have all the grocery bags right here. I won't carry it with my hand. They'll all be right there. And then same thing, it's just like the perfect clothes hanger. I just put everything right there. So I do quite a bit with my left hand, but I think it's just a more tedious things like keyboard as an example, and I'm a web designer is what my background is. So I definitely have some elbow problems. I've had shoulder surgery. I was a pro bowler, so sometimes my wrist hurts. So a little bit of wear and tear.
Nice. Well, that's pretty cool to see that you've been, that athletically active too in pro bowling. I think bowling is pretty fun on its own. What inspired you to start this podcast as well?
Well, it really comes back from, I had a 30-year career in corporate America that I really enjoyed. But in 2016, I found out I had cancer. I had throat cancer. And it was at that time that it just made me look at my life and just think, I guess you get a little older and you go through something like that. And I was just kind of questioning what my legacy was. I don't want to get too deep or, try to get too melodramatic, but that's really what it was. And I realized that there was a whole community out there that I really hadn't participated in. And I get it, because now as I do this podcast and talk to other people at events and things like that, one of the things I've learned about amputees is there is the feeling of alone, because when we go out, I have Cardinal season tickets. You can see I'm a Cardinal fan, Arizona Cardinal. And, I'll go to a Cardinal game and I'll be the only one like me there. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that. I actually like it. I'm kind of a ham. But after the cancer and I decided I wanted to do a little bit more, I decided I'd like to try to learn a little bit more about the community. And if I was going to learn about it, I'd like to share what I learned. And I thought a podcast would be the perfect way. And then there's also two other things because I think if you go through cancer, you need to have, and maybe anything in life, you just need to have those goals in front of you. And I had
Yeah.
two goals in front of me that I wanted to fulfill if I made it to the other side. And again, not try to sound melodramatic. Two things I wanted to do. One, I wanted to try stand-up comedy, and I'm very happy to say that I not only tried it, I'm performing quite a bit
Nice. There
in
you
the
go.
Southwest portion of the United States. And then
Yeah.
number two, I wanted to go back on the Pro Bowler tour and hit one more stop. And I have not done that. And I still want to do that. Now,
Okay.
the thing about the bowling was I'm very prideful, and I used to love to practice. And one of the things I can tell you right now is I don't like I don't like to practice, So
Yeah.
so I don't know whether I'll ever be able to do that, because I never want to go out there and embarrass myself. And to not do that, you got to put the time in, and I'm not sure I want to put the
Sure.
time in.
Sure. Yeah, no, I kind of feel the same way. So with running actually, I'm really feeling getting older, although I'm not that old, only 30, but my knees are starting to feel a little older.
Sure.
And after running for 362 days a year for 8 years, my body is pretty shot. So,
Wow.
I've run two marathons within the
Nice.
couple years, and that's been kind of my goal for this kind of grit and determination that I have. And I love running longer distances. I like to hike a lot as well. I'm just an outdoors kind of person, but the longer the distance, the better for me. So, I kind of feel that way right now with the marathon. It's a love-hate relationship because the last one that I didn't quite finish it. I was 2 miles from the finish and I just about collapsed. So I've got kind of a beef with the marathon right now that I need to kind of get back in shape and finish
Yes.
that. So I feel that, but I've recently come into my own with road cycling. So I've got just a secondhand bike that my wife got for me from one of her friends, that I've been able to get out on the bike a few times a week now and feel great and get to go these long distances again. And it's really opened my eyes to another new sport. My wife is a former pre-Olympic rower. And the rowing industry is pretty interesting to me too, because all three of my siblings have rowed, or they are rowing at the collegiate level.
Wow.
So I'm now a volunteer for the Learn to Row program through Saratoga Rowing Association here in upstate New York. So in the summer here, every Tuesday, Thursday, I'll go out after work and go out there with some of the new rowers learning how to row. And it's a pretty fun sport to be into.
Wow, that's fantastic. I would need one of your prosthetics. You'd have to build me something to do the rowing. But you had said something. I got
Sure.
to ask this question. You said you
Yeah.
ran 362 days a year. My mind, first of all, very impressive. My mind goes, what 3 days did he take off?
Oh
Like
man,
birthday, like birthday, Christmas, and New Year's or something? Or
basically not New Year's. There was a New Year's 5K, of course. Like I mentioned, my high school team was nationally ranked. Our girls team was actually better than the guys team ranking wise, just because of the level of competition we were at. But our guys team went to states and regionals and nationals a few times. So we were serious about the running. In the summertime, we would run 100 miles a week. Yeah, and this is
wow.
as a high school athlete.
Yeah.
So, we got pushed probably a little harder than we should have, and I burnt out a little earlier than I probably should have. But I ran a 4:30 mile. I had under a 15:30 5K. And I finished my first marathon in, what was it, 3 hours and 8 minutes. So pretty well versed on the kind of higher end. I would say, and when you're a runner, it's like the middle of the pack when you want to talk about the elites. But it was a lot of fun. Got to go to a lot of cool places, but definitely needed to scale back after college to. And I only ran 1 year in college, actually. Ran 1 year at Siena College. They're a D1 program.
Wow.
Albeit when I was there, a program in need of some improvement. Ran 1 year, just wasn't quite the same from high school, so I decided to just kind of do my own thing, and then got into the longer distance running after that.
That's That's one of the talents I had never possessed, being able to run long distances. So I really admire that. There's no way I could do that. That's awesome.
Yeah, my favorite was the mile and the half mile, just because they were just a little bit longer than the sprinters could run. So I was at an advantage there. But yeah, that was the middle distance program, was the 800 and the 1600. And yeah, I broke 2 minutes in the half mile one time, ran a 159. And so I was cruising at that level, but then when I got to college, kind of just fell apart. So longer distances it was for me.
Well, I don't know, but it fell apart. I mean, your life changed and your perspective and your direction changed. And I think there's a lot of people that benefited from that because of all the 3D printing, all the teaching and everything you're doing with your business. So yeah. I think your direction's even better.
Oh yeah, just kind of refocused in a different direction, right?
Excellent. Well, Fabrication Fridays, you said you wanted to use some of this or all of this on there. So I thank you so much for allowing me to be on your podcast.
Yeah.
And I certainly want to thank you for being on this podcast. I learned a lot today. Thank you so much for being on the We're Not Stumped podcast.
Yeah, no, I'm very happy we were able to connect and do this. I'd love, like I said, to share this on Fabrication Friday. Where we're in the 3D printing industry, right up there with everything that's happening new and exciting, and it's just a fun time. So I appreciate you allowing me to share this too.
That was the We're Not Stumped podcast, hosted by Mike Boland. If you want to be a guest on the program, reach out to Mike at his email address, mike@mikeboland.com. This podcast is produced by One Hand Man Productions. If you are looking to start your podcast, go to onehandmanproductions.com.